Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one and welcome back to a Gnome Abroad. Now, in yesterday's World of Warships video I did refer to a Dutch cruiser as a swamp German ship and that means today I have to make up for it by showing you around the Netherlands in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Come on, you have to admit swamp German is pretty... Alright. Honestly, I've probably been to the Netherlands more times than any other country, and I've been to a lot of other countries. But there's something about the Netherlands that just keeps bringing me back. And I think it's the same thing that the men of Easy Company, the famous band of brothers of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, all said that when they were fighting through Europe, from France, through the Netherlands, into Belgium, and eventually into Germany, it was the Netherlands where they had the best time. And it was because of the reception that they received from the Dutch people. And I'd have to agree. I mean, I've met friendly people all over the world. I've met some very unfriendly people all over the world as well, but nothing even comes close to the Dutch. And I don't know what it is about these people. They've got such a unique culture that they can be so hard-working and inventive, and so chilled out, laid back and easygoing at the same time. As I said, I've been to the Netherlands many times, and my first occasion on visiting the Netherlands was with the Royal Navy shortly after the First Gulf War, with the frigate HMS Brazen. And my first visit to the Netherlands was probably the same place that most people visit the first time they go to the Netherlands, the city of Amsterdam. And the first sight that is probably going to greet most people when they arrive in Amsterdam for the first time is Amsterdam's famous central train station. For all those tourist backpackers, this is the first sight of the city that you're probably going to have, and the second sight of the city is probably going to be one of the coffee shops, where they are not actually famous for selling coffee, because of course cannabis is legal in the Netherlands. So you go into one of these coffee shops, you order a coffee, and you have yourself a little Dutch brownie, which is made with hash. Brings a whole new meaning to the phrase hash brown. This, of course, is all entirely legal in the Netherlands, and it's one of the principal reasons why Amsterdam is such a popular tourist destination. The other reason why Amsterdam is such a popular tourist destination, and no, it's not the Rijksmuseum, which I have visited, and where you can see, amongst others, the works of Vincent van Gogh, Hieronymus Bosch, Maurits Escher, Rembrandt van Rijn, and many other famous and influential Dutch artists. And it's not the Anne Frank Museum, which is also definitely worth a visit and tells the story of the young German-Dutch Jewish girl by the name of Anne Frank, who was hidden from the Gestapo by a Dutch family in the attic of their Amsterdam townhouse for 2 years between 1942 and 1944 before she was eventually discovered and sent to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp where she died. But her diary survived intact. And all of that and much more is on display at the Anne Frank Museum on the Prinsengracht in Amsterdam. Now, the other major reason why millions of tourists flock to Amsterdam every year is, well, as well as the fact that cannabis is legal in the Netherlands, prostitution is legal too. And the area around the Canal District in Amsterdam in particular can be a source of massive culture shock if you're not Dutch, and therefore completely used to this sort of thing, and you're visiting for the first time, because all of the townhouses fronting onto the Canal District, the ground floors are basically, how can I put this? Lots and lots of young ladies in various different stages of undress, sitting in front of their windows, usually looking quite bored, reading a book or smoking a cigarette and waiting for somebody to come up and knock on the door, at which point the curtains get closed over the bay windows and business gets conducted. All of this taking place while thousands upon thousands of tourists are wandering up and down the Canal District, just observing everything that's going on. The whole place really is a massive tourist hotspot. And I do mean that. I saw families, mothers, fathers, taking their children for a wander down the Canal District, looking at all of the prostitutes. And just the act of wandering around Amsterdam was kind of surreal, because in most ways Amsterdam is just like any other major European city. I mean, the architecture is distinctly Dutch, although it does share a lot in common with certain other lowlands countries like Belgium, for example, particularly Bruges. But you're wandering along and you instantly see things that are common to any other major European city. Famous brands like, oh look, there's a McDonald's, and next to the McDonald's, oh look, there's a Barclays Bank, and right next to the Barclays Bank, oh look, there's a brothel. Wait, what? Yep, there's a brothel, right on the high street, smack between the Barclays Bank and the Waterstones bookshop. And of course, the Dutch are all going, and what's the big deal here? I mean, it's only sex. And they're absolutely right. It's only sex. But that's the Dutch for you. They just have such a refreshingly honest and open-minded attitude about everything. I can recall the first time that I actually had any kind of interaction, although not directly, with the Dutch. And it was shortly before I'd actually been to the Netherlands by myself for the first time. We were at Portland, which used to be the headquarters of Flag Officer Sea Training. It's since moved to Plymouth. But we were doing training, and there was a Dutch frigate there. I think it was the HN-LMS Jacob van Heemskerk, a Dutch frigate. And we did a cross-poll with them, and what that basically involves is we take a handful of our ship's company and they go and live on the Dutch ship for a couple of days, and a bunch of their ship's company come and live on our ship for a few days. Well, anyway, a couple of days went by, and then we got our ship's company back, and naturally we all wanted to know what it was like on the Dutch ship, and they said it was terrible. It was absolutely horrible. Worst experience they've ever had. So we all said, well, you're going to have to explain this. What was so bad about it? I mean, the Dutch sailors that we had were great. So our guys said, well, you don't understand. On board a Dutch ship, all the men and women, they sleep in the same mess decks. And they shower in the same bathrooms. There's no segregation between the genders. So going to the bathroom was absolutely terrifying. Now, of course, all of the Dutch listening to this video are shaking their heads going, well, what's the big deal? I mean, it's not even sex. It's just a naked body. I mean, what? Don't understand what the big deal is. And, well, yeah. And, of course, a few months later, I went to Amsterdam, and then suddenly I understood. It was, all right, I get it now. Well, that was the first time that I went to Amsterdam, but it absolutely wasn't the last. And on the second time that I visited Amsterdam with the Navy, it was on board the destroyer HMS Newcastle. I was a few years older and a little bit wiser, and of course I knew exactly what was in store for any members of the ship's company who had never been to Amsterdam before, one of whom was a member of our mess deck, a young stores accountant, and I mean young, he was like 17 years old, whose nickname was Dickie. I won't give his full name, and I will at least make some effort to preserve his anonymity. But young Dickie was such a sweet, innocent cherub of a child. He swore, as we were telling him what lay in store for him on the trip across the North Sea to Amsterdam, he swore that he was going to remain true to his girlfriend, and he wasn't going to do any of that nasty stuff that all of us old sweats were going to get up to when we got to Amsterdam. He was adamant that he was going to be a good boy. It took exactly one night in Amsterdam to turn this sweet, angelic child into the world's biggest sex pest. And I'm not exaggerating here. Young Dickie, bless him, in the year and a half that he spent on board HMS Newcastle, in a mess deck that featured some legendary animals, he would get up to stuff while ashore that would make even the old sweats embarrassed. To this day, the members of 2Q Port Logistics Mess Deck HMS Newcastle remain proud of what we turned Dickie into. So, yeah, that was Amsterdam. I've been to Amsterdam a couple of times now, but it's not the only place in the Netherlands that I visited with the Navy. The second place that I visited was a sleepy little town on the northern coast of the Netherlands that goes by the name of Den Helder. The dockyards and naval base that exist in Den Helder were actually built by Napoleon Bonaparte. And today it is still the Royal Netherlands Navy's main base of operations. And we were visiting in HMS Brazen, I believe it was, to take part in the Dutch Navy's Navy Days, a big celebration that they hold every year. People come from all around the Netherlands to visit ships and watch demonstrations. So we were there showing the flag for Britain, but we weren't the only British unit there, because since 1972, the Royal Marines and the Netherlands Marine Corps have worked together as part of 3 commando brigade during exercises and real conflict situations. Plus, the Dutch Marine Mountain Warfare and Force Reconnaissance Troop of Sea Squadron is placed under UK operational command as part of Sea Squadron United Kingdom Special Boat Service, and together these form an organisation known as the UK and Netherlands Amphibious Force. So the Royal Marines and the Dutch Marines worked together all the time. And there was a platoon of Royal Marines also present at Navy Days in Den Helder, who, with the Dutch Marines, were doing demonstration boarding exercises. I only spent a couple of days in Den Helder, though. I mean, I was there for the Navy Days part, and while the rest of the ship's company were taking some additional time just to relax before returning to sea, I had to go to Rotterdam because my sister was getting married, and I'd managed to secure some time off in order to return to the UK and attend the wedding. The thing is, Den Helder is right at the northern end of the Netherlands, and Rotterdam is right down the southern end of the Netherlands. But the Dutch Marines very kindly gave me a young Marine who spoke no English whatsoever and a jeep, and he drove me all the way down to Rotterdam, where I caught a ferry over to Hull in the UK, where my sister lived and was getting married. I didn't get to see an awful lot of Rotterdam itself, and I certainly didn't stop in the city in order to take in the sights and sounds, because I was being delivered to a ferry terminal in a jeep driven by a Dutch Marine. But when I was on the ferry from Rotterdam to Hull, I did get to see firsthand the just astonishing size and complexity of the Rotterdam port facilities. It's the biggest port in Europe. I mean, I thought that the facilities at Jebel Ali, just outside of Dubai, were impressive, and they are, but they are nothing compared to Rotterdam. Rotterdam is where two of the biggest rivers in Europe terminate, the Rhine and the Maas, and you can also reach the Scheldt River estuary down in Antwerp via Rotterdam, itself a massive industrial shipping complex. But from Rotterdam, via the Rhine and the Maas, you can ship goods as far as France, Switzerland, and of course, the industrial heartland of the Ruhr River Valley in Germany. The sheer amount of shipping that goes through Rotterdam in any given day is nothing short of astronomical. And of course, I had a front row seat viewing all of this from the viewing gallery of the ferry that I was taking from Rotterdam to Hull to catch my sister's wedding as we sailed down the Maas River and into the North Sea. And it was also here where I got my first glimpse of some of the engineering that goes into, well, I probably wouldn't be exaggerating if I was to say that goes into making life even possible in as much of a third of this country. Because, of course, a third of the Netherlands is below sea level. And that's a bit of a problem when you're right on the coast of the North Sea. This is a problem that the Dutch have been struggling with for hundreds of years. Not always successfully, but in the last 100 years or so, they've come up with better ideas than simply building dikes and trying to hold the sea back with sea walls. Instead, they've got some of the most sophisticated flood defense systems in the entire world. And we're approaching some of them right now. Just up ahead, we're shortly going to be flying right over them, are a pair of floating storm surge gates that are known as the Meeslentering. They're actually built at the Skoda works in the Czech Republic and then transported here to Rotterdam. The idea is that whenever there's a storm incoming from the North Sea that's going to raise the water level by more than 2.6 meters, these things will close automatically. And that's exactly what happened on the 8th of November 2007 when a storm surge was detected, the gates closed, and the entire Dutch coast was protected against flooding for the first time since 1976. The arms, and there are two of them, weigh 6,800 tons each. It's one of the biggest man-made moving structures in the world. So I saw all of this as I was passing through Rotterdam on the way to Hull on a Dutch ferry for my sister's wedding. Unfortunately, because I'm legendarily crap, while I had remembered to pack my dress uniform and my medals, I had somehow managed to forget to pack my dress uniform trousers. A fact that I only discovered when I arrived in Hull. So my future brother-in-law had to loan me a pair of black trousers for the wedding. As you can see here in the only surviving photograph that I have. In case you're wondering, this is not the same sister that I completely accidentally bumped into in St. Lucia on her honeymoon. I do have more than one sister. These, of course, were not the only occasions when I had the opportunity to visit the land of the Swamp Germans. Many years after retiring from the Navy, my friend Roy and I, who's also a military veteran, he served in the Queen's Household Cavalry Regiment, we often like to go on road trips. And a couple of years ago we decided that we wanted to retrace the route of 30 core during Operation Market Garden up Hell's Highway between Eindhoven, Nijmegen and Arnhem. And that is going to be coming up in the next episode of A Gnome Abroad, where we will be once again returning to the Netherlands. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.